Can't get enough of Kelly and Ramya?
We're now on YouTube for you to indulge in highlights from our show. Guest waiting in the wings. We're going to be speaking now with Marcus Kolga, and he is a Toronto-based researcher, journalist, and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. So Marcus's research examines how foreign influence operations spread misinformation to Canadians through social media. This is a very interesting and important topic, and he's joining us now to talk about the threat that these things pose to democracy. Marcus, thank you for coming on the show, and really important things to talk about, as I said.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So give us kind of the scene, set it up for us, if you will. We all know that misinformation spreads very quickly on social media, but how big is the issue in terms of the effect on Canadian politics, etc.?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, this isn't a new problem.
No.
We know that the Russian government has been operating in this area of disinformation and influence operations pretty much since the Second World War, when we discovered a major operation in 1945 targeting Canadians, Canadian interests, and a number of Russian assets at that time, journalists, elected officials, and such. And they haven't really stopped doing this since then. And we've, of course, have other authoritarian regimes who have jumped on board. And, of course, we have domestic actors, those individuals who are trying to push their own agendas, conspiracy theories. All of this is in the mix, and it is toxic. We do have a very congested and polluted information environment right now in Canada, not just on social media, but just generally online as well. And there are millions of Canadians who we know are affected by this because most Canadians use social media. So at one time or another, I think almost all Canadians have been exposed to misinformation and disinformation, and it doesn't look like things are going to get any better anytime soon. This is a threat that is persistent, it's growing, and it could eventually erode trust in our democracy, our elected officials, and media, and we're seeing that happen every single day.
It's interesting, Marcus. It used to be that you had to worry about that bad actor being a reporter, maybe, or somebody who wrote a column and took a different left wing or whatever it might be and pushed it and led people into believing, hey, this person knows their stuff. I should pay attention and hang on every word they say. But now with social media, you got a whole world of us stepping up and saying, hey, I've got an audience of people wanting to hear my opinion, and there's no more of that. Well, yeah, but with that comes a level of responsibility. And right now, a lot of that research focuses on that misinformation from Russia, that what kind of ongoing threats that we should think about, worry about, and be aware of. And what impact?
Well, right, Kelly, you make a really, really good point about opinions. I mean, in the old days, we may disagree with a columnist who wrote about their opinion on specific facts, but we all sort of agreed on what the basic facts were, and we may have different interpretations about them and argue about our opinions. Now the problem is that we have countries like Russia who are injecting information that is not based on facts. In fact, it's based on lies, conspiracies, and we've seen them target a range of topics, very sensitive topics over the past few years, especially here in Canada and the Western world. One of them is, of course, COVID. We saw Russian information operations target the pandemic to advance anti-vaccination narratives, to promote vaccine hesitancy. And we saw this actually throughout the world. And even the European Union warned that Russian information agents were trying to intensify the negative effects of COVID during that period. We've seen it during the invasion of Ukraine, all sorts of disinformation being promoted regularly by the Russian government and Russian state media outlets, and unfortunately, some actors in Canada who support them. This includes this ongoing narrative that Russia is invading Ukraine to try and denazify it. This is the excuse that Vladimir Putin used already during the start of the war when he announced that it was a not a war, but a 3-day operation to denazify
Right.
Ukraine.
Yeah.
Ukraine's president is part of the Jewish community, and there isn't a single far right party in Ukraine's parliament. So it's a complete nonsense narrative, but it's intended to turn us against Ukraine, and thankfully that's not working.
There's so many questions as to how something like this ends up working, right? Like, how do we measure why it's so powerful, why this tactic can get so far? I mean, an obvious answer is that technology, everything is so widespread. Instantly, information is at your fingertips. So whether that information is true or not is almost irregardless of how big that information ends up feeling, right? So talk to us about the mechanics, please. Like, how does something like state-sponsored actors work? How does the misinformation get spread so effectively and so quickly?
Well, that is also a great question. And the tactics are pretty similar across all of the authoritarian regimes that use disinformation and influence operations to mislead us. Essentially, what happens is that there's someone in one of these capitals, whether it's Beijing or it's Moscow, Tehran, someone comes up with a narrative that is misleading, it's false, but it's meant to advance the interests of those regimes. That then is often publicized by diplomats that are sometimes operating in a country like Canada, perhaps by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They then move on to state media platforms. So in Russia's case, it's a platform called RT, which is its English language state-controlled media outlet. And from there, the hope for these propagandists is that influencers will pick up that story and push it out on their own social media channels. It might get quoted by someone. And in that process, basically, it's like a laundromat. They wash out the regime's fingerprints from it. And it sounds like it's a legitimate narrative. If there's someone that you can identify in social media that's Canadian or American, who's retweeting this stuff. And that's really the gold standard. And in the best case scenarios for these regimes, one of these influencers is picked up, and this influencer will get quoted by mainstream media on national television, for example, promoting those same narratives. And that's the real objective of them. Usually they don't get that far, but they certainly are. They've created a swamp and a cesspool in social media nowadays.
And it's so scary because there are those people who just do that for their own platform, for their own benefit, will spread. I have to be opposite. I have to say, oh, here's something that I can utilize that supports that. And it's so scary. When we hear this stuff as Canadians, as anybody out there, what can we do about it, Marcus? And how can we be sure we're media illiterate? Because a lot of time it's media getting screamed at too for, they make up so much stuff and push it through.
Yeah, no, I hear that a lot, that, a lot of these conspiracies are blaming mainstream media, good folks like you who are presenting very good information to your audience. There are a few basic tips that I tell Canadians that they can deploy to sort of protect themselves. One is to check the source of the information that they're receiving. I'm an old school sort of guy, so I pay for a newspaper to be delivered to my door every morning. I like that sensation of turning the pages of the newspaper while I'm drinking my coffee. It costs money to do that, and I think we all recognize that good information, good media does cost. But when they do see news, make sure that it's coming from a credible source, so one that you recognize. If it looks like it's coming from somewhere outside, if you don't recognize the source, it's better not to maybe click on it. And if you click on it, make sure that you consume that information with a critical eye, that you're not necessarily, believing it and certainly not retweeting it. The other point I would say is that if you see a headline on social media, a statement that is really elicits an emotional reaction, it makes you really angry, for example, it's probably meant to do that, if that's the case. And so, take a step back before you, retweet or like a post like that. take a look at the headline. Again, take a look at the source. If you don't recognize it, it could be just a political opportunist and some website that is going to make money off of your click or off your like on that tweet, and that's what they're trying to do. So they're not always state actors either. Sometimes it's these grifters who are trying to do this too. So those are the two main steps that I would and tools that I would suggest, that cognitive tools that Canadians should use when they're looking at social media and information posted on there.
Yeah, Marcus, you're pointing out something so significant here, which is just like our reactionary way of handling things, right? It's so easy with the click of a button. You're, reposting, liking, you're taking sides, you're just reacting to whatever is out there, and it's happening like exponentially because of what it is to be to have a phone at your fingertips nowadays. That's just what it means. And you mentioned, paying for sources that are reliable, that are peer reviewed, and we don't do that. The average person does not do that. You get your news off of TikTok and Twitter and everything else that's out there. So it's kind of ironic. Is it hard to then go from where we are now to almost turn it back, unwind it and say, okay, we need to be more cautious. We need to be more, take a breath between things. Is it hard to have that conversation with people?
Well, that's the question I get asked the most. How do we fix this? The unfortunate thing is that the genie really is out of the bottle, and trying to get that genie back in is going to be very difficult. And it's going to take a complete whole society approach to doing that. I mentioned good media, newspapers costing money. Well, we need to make those newspapers available. Local newspapers are shutting down all over the place. We need to make sure that local communities have those newspapers, because they're staffed by people like you, professional journalists, who have been trained in the handling of facts, the verification of facts. We may not always like the facts, right, but facts are different from opinion. When it comes to professional journalists, we have to trust them. There's maybe some bad apples out there, but the ones that work for our legacy media companies, papers like the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, the National Post, these people are professionals. We should trust them. That's their job. And so starting there and making sure that we have a healthy media environment and healthy information that Canadians can consume, that's the very first point, or very first thing that we need to do as we set about trying to heal the nation and end the polarization that's really just continues to grow in our country.
Yeah, there's so much to think about, and we didn't even get to AI and how things are getting worse on that front in terms of like sifting through understanding misinformation from real information. But Marcus, we got to let you go. Hopefully we can get you back on again because this is fascinating stuff. Thank you.
Thanase, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the time.
Thanks for watching.
You can catch Kelly and Ramya weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern on AMI.